Good morning. My name is Hope Nabalayo. Welcome to UNC TV. Today we are live at the University of Nairobi's Taifa Hall, and I will be taking you through a very special occasion. In partnership with the University of Nairobi, the WRI, that is the World Resource Institute, will be launching a capacity building program called RAMP, that is Resilience and Adaptation Mentorship Program. This program will focus on addressing climatic issues in relation to the economic impact it has on the country, and it will be working together with different governments and local institutions across the African region, the East African region, and even here in Kenya. Of course, some of these climatic issues that relate to the economy of Kenya include the sudden hike in prices of agricultural products, as well as oil prices and other financial issues that the government seeks to address. And this is where RAMP comes to play. We will be talking with some notable people who will be speaking in the event today, and we shall start with the director of the Earth and Climate Science Department here at the University of Nairobi. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you.
Kindly tell us your name, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about the event here today.
Okay, I am Professor Daniel Olago, and Chair of the Department of Earth and Climate Sciences. And I also am the Research Director for the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation. So today's event is a major one because we are signing an MOU between the World Resources Institute and the University of Nairobi. And the main purpose of this particular MOU is that we are able to work together to build capacities in the area of climate finance. And it's extremely important because we know from the IPCC reports, the recent one actually, that in fact climate change is going to accelerate, and it is going to have a major impact on our economies as well as our livelihoods. And we also note from some of the work that has been done that we also will have an impact of climate change on educational attainment. So these are two major gaps: education in climate finance and building climate finance into policies, plans, strategies, reports such as the Kenya Economic Outlook and others. So as we stand here, there's this university network, which is under the RAMP program, is looking to build capacities in actually integrating macro-financial resilience into climate and environmental change issues. Those capacities do not exist, and worldwide it is quite low. It's not that they don't exist, but it is quite low. And we really need to have those capacities embedded within our continent here in Africa so that we are able to better address the issues of climate change and adaptation, the impacts on economies, and impacts on livelihoods.
Thank you for sharing that with us, but could you highlight on the significance of involving institutions such as this, the University of Nairobi? Like, how will we help to push this agenda?
Yes, the University of Nairobi is a bedrock for capacity building and training and education. And as such, we are in the prime position to be able to build the capacities to address the current and also future problems that we anticipate under climate change. In the national context, for example, we have the National Climate Change Learning Strategy, which was headed by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. It covers the period 2021 to 2030. That particular strategy has a vision that all Kenyans, all citizens, have the knowledge and skills to be able to address climate change and adaptation issues, that they have the knowledge and skills to be able to contribute actively towards a low carbon emissions economy, and also to contribute towards the carbon resilient sustainable development pathways for the country. So we're actually building a very, very critical force. And economic issues cut across the entire society, and the issues of climate change are actually multidimensional. So it has a lot of ramifications in all those intersecting aspects of climate, environment, socioeconomics, policy, and politics.
Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you. So we have just heard from the director of the Department of Climate and Earth Science here in Nairobi, in the University of Nairobi. And now we will be speaking to the director of Climate Africa, who will also be part of this discussion here at Taifa Hall. Good morning. Kindly tell us more about the ramp and what we're expecting from its launch.
Sure, thanks. So my name is Nisha Krishnan. I lead climate at the World Resources Institute for our Africa regional office. The Resilience and Adaptation Mainstreaming Program that we're here to learn about today with the Vice Chancellor from the University of Nairobi, as well as WRI's President, Ani Dasgupta, is really a program that's directed at building capacity within our central ministries of economics, of finance, who really make a lot of the underlying decisions of what gets invested in, how they think about growth in the country, and they give directives to all of the other ministries, right, in the country, and they are responsible for budgets. And it is really for them to help them understand, what are the impacts of climate change? How do we better design and better invest in our future? How do we make sure that the roads that we build are sort of can respond to when there's heavy rain or floods and aren't washed away? How do we actually make sure that the private sector starts really investing in climate adaptation? And so the RAMP program is targeted at governments, but also targeted at universities, because you are the bedrock of expertise and also training the next generation, right? So how do we also get graduate students and undergraduate students in economics, in finance, and policy who are going to be making decisions tomorrow, 10 years from now, to also understand the impacts of climate change? How do we change public finance management teaching going forward? How do we make sure that the universities are also known as experts to the government as well, so that there is the sort of the ecosystem of climate experts and finance experts in the country who can do this going forward? So that's what the RAMP program is all about. Kenya is actually our first country that we're working with both the university and the government, and we're hoping to expand to others, but we're very excited about this partnership and the program starting here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm very interested to know why we chose the University of Nairobi to be the first institution to launch this at, and if there was any particular gap you saw in the system that needed to be addressed.
Sure, that's a great question. So the RAMP actually has 10 universities in its university network. So University of Nairobi is one of the founding members of that university network. We also have SOAS and University of London. We have University of West Indies in Jamaica. So it's a global university network. And I think we all came together with the understanding that in curriculum these days, there needs to be a much better understanding of the adaptation component, so the responding to impacts, and not just the reducing emissions piece or our mitigation, right? So how do we actually change considerations around in your microeconomics and the macroeconomics classes you have? How do we insert climate to that such that there's an appreciation for that? And then there's specialist courses, right? I think Professor Olago talked about climate finance. So how do we think about accessing adaptation finance? What are course materials that we can develop to really plug that gap in our curriculum across the world? It's not just here, it's across the world. And how do we think about disaster risk finance? So we see floods, we see droughts. How do we think about the government financing that? How can the private sector mobilize to finance that? Those are all course materials we can develop. And so that's what the University Network is really trying to plug and share curriculum, maybe come up with a new course, a new degree if that's what was needed. But that's what the University Network is doing. And it's also to look at what research questions haven't been answered, right? So you might have, a government might say, we don't know how to integrate climate into our macroeconomic modeling that shows us how much we'd like to grow, what our GDP is going to be. Can professors here and students here help answer that question, right? And it's really trying to build that exchange going forward as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Thank you. All right, so there we have it. Nishan has told us more about the importance of involving the university community in pushing for this agenda. And we are lucky to have some members of the university fraternity whom we will also talk about. Hey, good morning. Good morning. Tell us your name and your designation here at the university and what you're looking forward to most in this launch.
Yeah, so thank you for that particular question. So by way of introduction, I am Kefa Simiyu. Yeah, I was a master student here at the Department of Economics, University of Nairobi. So with regard to today's event, rather, yeah, I'm looking forward to learning more about world resources, in particular the issue of transport infrastructure. That is with regard to sustainable transportation. And to that end, I look forward to learning more about how best we can integrate transport policy to address these issues of climate change, while at the same time ensuring that people do not lose their livelihoods. So I could say that I'm really excited about the event, and I believe it is going to be a learning opportunity, even as we look for other opportunities that are closely related to the issue of sustainable transportation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kefa. You've mentioned that you mastered in economics, and I'd like to know from your perspective the relation between climate change and economics here in the country.
Yeah, so basically from my end, what I could say is to draw our attention to a paper by William Northos that was on the issue of carbon taxes, whereby instead of going around trying to compel people to adhere to the issue of eco-friendly practices, we could just sanction taxes among those industrialists who we believe they are the greatest contributors to pollution and to similar related issues. But again, looking at it, there is a challenge of lobbyists. So I think we still have a long way to go. Like looking at the United States, there was a time when the House of the Congress rather was compelled to come up with a policy whereby those coal producers had to use some scrubbers. Then there were some lobby groups who went out and agitated against that particular move. So I think challenges are there, but still policy can be engineered in such a way that it becomes acceptable while ensuring that those who are affected most by issues of climate change benefit the most from those policy actions. But the buck still stops with our policymakers before it comes to the general public, because usually the public do not have the resources to agitate for any policy change. But there are some representatives who have been entrusted with that particular mandate. So I think it is back to our legislature and back to other stakeholders in that particular aspect. Yes.
Thank you very much, Kefa. I appreciate that. All right, that is Kefa. He was a master's student here at the University of Nairobi, and he has told us about how climate change affects the economy of the country. And recently, climate change has actually been classified to be macro-critical, which means that it has substantial effects to the economic stability of the country. And we will still be speaking to some members of the university fraternity, and let's hear what they have to say. Good morning, sir. We'll start with you telling us your name and your designation here at the university, and of course talk about the event here today.
Thank you very much. My name is Joshua Leichena. I work for the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis, and I'm in this event for the launch of the program. But more specifically is because we work with WRI very closely on issues to do with climate change and modeling. But the more important thing that touches on the program today is the involvement of youth. At Kipra, we have a program that we decided last year to engage youth in climate action. And we have various youth organizations that we have collaborated with. We did the first symposium on climate action in last year, October, where we had around 300 youth who attended, but they are working in various sectors, including waste management, climate action, environmental management. But after that, we were able to send 2 youth to COP27 in Egypt. And we were also able to produce 4 policy briefs which are in the Kipra website. Someone can be able to access them. But this year also, we had a second youth symposium, which was held at the Kenya School of Government between 2nd and 3rd of February. And it was very successful. They were talking about climate adaptation. And moving forward, we made it as a youth event for every year. But now, in support of the government, what the government is doing in terms of planting trees, we have partnered with the Kenya Forest Service. They have given us 5 hectares of land in Ngong Forest where we will be planting trees. And it is not only planting trees, we want to grow trees. Because sometimes people plant trees and then they disappear. But we want to ensure that this land we are going to tender these trees until they grow. That is the time we are going to vacate there. So we want to use the youth to be able to plant trees, and that is an element of climate adaptation. There are very many ways that we can be able to collaborate with youth. And now that we are in the university, the one that we are collaborating with, most of them finished the university, but those who are now in the university can actually be able to join those organizations. They can actually be able to reach on us, and we can be able to continue doing that good work. And finally, we want to say that because climate change is actually affecting the youth more than it is affecting the older generations, and actually they are the one who are going to get the heavy weight of the impact of climate change. That is why we feel that they must be at the center stage to be able to talk about climate change, what they are doing, so that they can be able to guarantee a better future for themselves. We have also we need also to give them voice to be able to speak, because when others are speaking in the policy dialogue there, they are articulating their issues. Now we want youth to have a platform where they can actually be able to articulate their issues as it relates to climate action. So we are doing very many things at Kipra. Yeah, they can be able to reach us, and I think we can be able to work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. We have just been told how important it is for us as the youth to be at the forefront of the climate change agenda. And I am pleased to have some youth who will tell us more about the same. Good morning. We'll start with you telling us your name and, of course, your designation here at the University of Nairobi.
My name is Peter Kariuki, and I'm a final year student at the University of Nairobi. At Pakabete, I pursue Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, crop protection major.
Okay, just as we've heard from the previous gentleman, it's very important for the youth to be at the forefront of this agenda. How are you pushing for improvement of climate change?
Well, as we know, there are so many things that are happening nowadays that they are really affecting, and I think the youth, they should be in the forefront of, because we have the energy and we have the time for this. Like we can join hands in planting of trees, coming up with ways that will affect, that we will be able to mitigate these things that are happening, like campaigning for the mitigation programs, and even joining hands in a launch like this, that it will help and motivate so many youths, so that we can join hands, because we know these problems, they're affecting us day by day, and there will be a major problems come come 10 years from now, or actually they are actually a problem right now as you're speaking. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. That is one of our students here at the University of Nairobi. He will be joining the rest of the audience inside Taifa Hall, where we will be discussing more about RAMP and the whole initiative together with an amazing panel. Thank you.
We go into that. It really is my distinct pleasure to welcome the Vice Chancellor of this great university, Professor Stephen Getahi Kiama.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you, Angela, even for considering the University of Nairobi together with the present CEO of World Resource Institute, Annie Jupiter, to have this program launched here at the University of Nairobi. We are very grateful. I want to acknowledge all great people who are here, the Vice President and Regional Director for Europe for World Resource Institute, Fedhoven, Janet Lagathan, Managing Director, Strategy Learning and Resorts, and the Global Presence and National Action, Adrian Lombo, our longtime friend, Professor Karanja, Senior Engagement Advisor, Rebecca Shali, Deputy Regional Director, Africa, and Nisha Krishna, Director, Climate Africa, members of the university community, invited guests. I warmly welcome you to the University of Nairobi. The University of Nairobi is a center of excellence that is already working on climate change-related issues across its various departments and institutes. And this, we have had a long history on working on issues of environment and climate change. You will note that Professor Wangari Maathai was here, President and CEO. She did her PhD here in anatomy, in the same discipline I worked on. And later on moved to deal with issues of environment until she won a Nobel Prize in 2004. It's interesting that she was initially in her PhD, she wasn't working on the core environment issues. She worked on issues development. She worked on the development of the testes of the bull, yeah. But later on started planting trees, and they went to concept of development from another perspective now. We have had others, CEO and President. We had Richard Odingo, Professor Richard Odingo from the Department of Geography and Information Science, was actually the vice chair of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is as you recall, the IPCC, as a body, won the Nobel Prize together with Al Gore in 2007. So after he finished his tour, when we had released him on leave of absence, he came back to teach geography here until he passed on some years back. Then we also had Professor Charles Okidi, who is actually considered as the father of environmental law, also from here in Africa and globally. So we have had certain pillars, and we can continue mentioning on and on. Currently, the distinguished chair of Wangari Maathai Institute for Peace and Environmental Studies, Patrick Vakoyen, who is the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, Vakoyen is actually the distinguished chair of the institute. And again, he's dealing with the issues of climate adaptation acceleration program across Africa. Yeah. So, so you have a worthy partner here. In addition, we have the Department of Earth and Climate Sciences, which is chaired by Professor Olago there, and he also is dealing with a lot of issues on climate change, because within it, we also have the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation, which is actually under the Faculty of Science and Technology. And he was director there for some time. Now he's the chairman of the Department of Earth and Climate Change. We also have the Department of Geography and Environmental Science, again dealing on issues of environment, as well as the Center for Environmental Law and Policy. We have the Wangari Maathai Institute for Peace and Environmental Studies. You are very familiar with Professor Wangari Maathai. We are happy to have Wanjira Maathai, the daughter of Maathai, who was, Wanjira was with us as part of the team of conceptualizing the Wangari Maathai Institute until how it is now. Currently, the director is Dr. Denya Doita, who is seated there. This institute was established in honor of the late Professor Wangari Maathai to immortalize her ideas and works that made her work become the first African woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize and the only Kenyan so far to have received this distinguished prize. We have mainstreamed the studies of climate and climate change in our curriculum across various departments in the university. Climate change impacts is already affecting our economies and communities in Africa here. And you are aware we bear the biggest burden for climate change, and yet we contribute the least in polluting the environment. We are leading from the effects of climate-induced drought that has occasioned water, as well as food and nutrition scarcity. We must do better to understand, plan for, and finance our responses to dealing with these climate impacts. So we are actually therefore very proud and happy to be a founding partner of the University Network for Strengthening Microfinancial Resilience on Climate Change, a part of Resilience and Adaptation Mainstreaming Program that we are going to launch here at Iva Hall today. I think it must be sometimes last year, we also commissioned the President of Kenya then, Uhuru Kenyatta, to be the global champion on adaptation of climate change from this same hall here, when he was still the president. Resilience Adaptation Mainstreaming Program, LAMP, is a program that aims at improving the capacities of our university faculty to conduct research and deliver the latest curriculum and the materials to our students, and allow us to be partners with other research institutes and the government of Kenya as we chart a more resilient pathway for the country. It is therefore a great honor, Mr. President and CEO of the World Resource Institute, that you have chosen the University of Nairobi and indeed Kenya for this important launch. We are very, very grateful for this. And we hope that what we have started now is going to be a long-term relationship, transformative relationship, that's going to impact on both the students, fraternity, the faculty, as we aim to making the lives of our people better in adapting to the changes of climate. And we hope that in the near future, we also have you as a member of the faculty of this distinguished University of Nairobi. With those few remarks then, I end my speech there. Thank you very much and God bless you. Wajira, back to you.
Professor Kema, thank you very much. In fact, we will work on that professorship. As you know, he is Dr. Ani Dasgupta, and he has been teaching in institutions, so I know we will follow that up. Thank you very much for that. I'm always struck by the fact that even as climate and issues of climate change have become globally more important, more intense, and investments for climate research have continued to go up. Only 3% of global climate research funds make their way to Africa. And of those funds, most of them, Professor, actually end up in American or European universities. That makes this program crucially important as we go and anchor research, especially on adaptation and resilience, in African institutions. This is a groundbreaking initiative, and one that at the World Resources Institute is a priority. Our President and CEO, Annie, has made it very clear that the partnerships we forge here, and as the MD for partnerships, I listened very carefully, that are anchored locally. So I want to welcome him to share his message to you, for you today. Annie, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. And I was told the university is closed, so I'm very, very grateful that you're here. I just want to thank you, Wanjira, and also thank you, Professor, for your remarks and also for hosting us today. And after spending last few hours with the professor, I can see that our partnership will be long. I can already feel it. So thank you very much. I hope this is just the beginning of a long-term partnership with the university. I just want to say before I share my remarks about the program that we're launching today, I love being in universities. It's an absolute privilege to be here in this historic university and in this historic auditorium. I love university for two reasons. I just love being here. Also, I'm hoping that after you hear us and meet us, you will think about joining us at WRI. Right? Thank you. WRI is a research organization. We are based globally, definitely in Africa. Wanjira leads our work here, but all over the world. We are about 2,000 people and growing. So think about a career in changing the world from bottom up. So that's one reason I'm excited to be here. I'm very pleased to be here with Vice Chancellor Heimer to launch our program on resilient and adaptation mainstreaming program called RAMP for short, and also present Stories to Watch a little later. The uniqueness of the RAMP program is the RAMP program recognizes the climate impact that is already countries are facing across the world that are directly connected to the economic and development outcome of the countries. So this is not just something that happens, it's a climate thing, there's a risk, but it actually impacts countries across the world and how countries grow and not grow. You know, and Africa faces a series of climate-related weather disasters, from droughts to intense storms to heat waves to land you can't grow crops in, floods or lack of water. All those things threaten livelihoods. Livelihoods across the continent, livelihoods in Kenya. So the question is, these impacts, of course, are felt by families and communities in the front lines. But those impacts, to manage them, government officials also have to figure out how to manage it and how to make these impacts better managed, better planned, so that livelihoods are less impacted. And how to also manage the pressure they already face. Out of the 50 most vulnerable countries in the world, 28 of them are in serious debt distress. And why is that important? Because as you have more debt, it puts more pressure in the public finances, and at the same time, when you have climate-related disasters, you have less money to figure out how to help communities on the front line. So this is a vicious circle, a cycle that actually makes things worse. So the question is, how can central government, Minister of Economic, so I think three ministries mostly we will focus on: Ministry of Finance, Economics, and Planning, to figure out the trajectory of the country needs to take, given that these impacts are growing. Every year it's growing. Last year was worse, 2022 was worse than 21, and so on. And, you know, I was in, with a lot of my colleagues here, I was in the last COP in Egypt, one of my most interesting meetings, where a meeting of, called Coalition of Finance Ministers. There are about 70 finance ministers that formed a coalition to learn better what to do about climate. And the question that all we're asking is that how do we actually, you know, there's no common way to measure risk across countries right now. So if they have limited resources, which every country has, how do they figure out, should we protect the port? Or should we protect roads? Should we protect health, rural healthcare? Where do we actually invest, have the best outcome possible given the limited resources countries have? This is exactly what the RAMP program is about. It's exactly to provide the data, the capability, and modeling capability for Ministry of Finance, Economics, Planning, so they have the tools to integrate adaptation and adaptation planning and climate science into the decision they have to make on everything, not just on environment, for everything from roads, boats, hospitals. This is what it does. To do this, because this is a long-term agenda, to do this well, partnerships are critical. This is what Manjura just said, and we are so proud to be partnering with the University of Nairobi and the Kenya Institute of Public Policy and Research and Analysis, KIPRA, as a critical partner. Why University of Nairobi? For two reasons. First of all, this is a long-term agenda of capacity building in the different ministries, but also to train the future experts and future leaders who will be working in these ministries in the future. Also at this moment, as we were just talking with the professor, the government always look at universities for advice, for new science, of what is the thing. So we are hoping University of Nairobi will become the center of the science of how to bring adaptation and planning and climate science into everyday public policy decisions. This university is one of the 10 universities we are going to work with across the continent in the RAMP global network of university and develop curriculum together to get professional and students train this. So this is a network across, and I'm absolutely sure University of Nairobi will be a leader of this network. So we very much look forward to partnership, growing this knowledge, growing this capacity, so our countries here are better planned in a way to figure out how climate impacts actually impact our communities and livelihood less than it would normally. So that is the goal of this program. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you, to be able to actually sign a memorandum of understanding and launch the program. And thank you very much for all of you for being here.
Thank you very much, Annie, and I am really honored that WRI chose the University of Nairobi because it is, as you said, an institution of high distinction. You mentioned KIPRA, and I wanted to make sure that we recognize the presence of KIPRA as well. I know Joshua is it Joshua? Oh, Joshua is here. So thank you very much, Joshua. I wanted to give KIPRA an opportunity to share. We're very honored the partnership that we have, and we know just how important the analysis and especially policy analysis you do has been to us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, the CEO, World Resources Institute, Professor, and Wagari, and all who are represented here. My name is Joshua Laichena. I'm here to represent the Executive Director, Dr. Rose Goge, in this event. But one of the things I want to mention is that we have really worked with the World Resources Institute on various elements. Currently, we are doing a project that we are analyzing cross-economy analysis on the modeling that is ongoing in the country. But also, there are various other elements that we are working on. But more specifically to this event, I know I have been involved in discussing the RAMP, crafting of the RAMPs and the capacity building that it is going to offer in the public policy making space. Perhaps what I would want to mention from the KIPRA's point of view, we have various elements that we are tackling to do with the climate change. First, we have what we call KIPRA annual regional conference, which is going to happen on 21st to 23rd of June this year, and it will be held in Cliffy, that is Pwani University. This event is focusing, it is actually themed as accelerating economic growth and the development of ASOS in Kenya, and is focusing on various elements. One of them is to do with droughts and floods and characteristics, mitigations and adaptations. The second element that it is focusing on is on natural resource management, which includes land tenure, land reforms, dry land forests, wildlife conservancies, and the rest. But it is also looking at climate financing and climate insurance. All these elements are elements of climate change, and that is one of the things that we are doing in that. The second thing that we are doing as KIPRA in relation to, that relates to this program, is actually integrating the youth in climate change. We have been working with the youth from last year, and we have actually found that when we look at the climate change that has happened, the impact that have happened, the people who will be affected most are the youth, yet they have contributed very little. We also noted that they do not have a voice. They don't have a platform where they can be able to articulate their issues. So KIPRA took it upon itself to be able to support the youth every year, to have a symposium where they will be able to discuss issues related to climate change, to discuss what they are doing in that space, supporting the government and other organizations that they are working on. So we held the first symposium last year in October, and the second symposium was held this year, between 2nd and 3rd in February. It was at Kenya School of Government. And this is where youth are meeting, and of course we want to bring them together to be able to speak on the issues to do with climate change, what the youth are doing, and the support that we are giving them. More importantly, we supported actually 2 youth to go and represent the Kenyan youth in the COP27 in Egypt. But also, what came out from the first symposium, we were able to support them, and they developed 4 policy briefs related to climate change. And one of them is sustainable plastic waste management for youth, capacity building for the youth in climate change, financing youth activities in climate change, and supporting youth involvement in climate smart agriculture. Those policy briefs are already at the KIPRA website. You can be able to access them. And also I want to ask the students now who are here, you can actually be able to join. When we will be having the next event, you can be involved to be able to do that. Finally, one thing that we have noticed about dealing with the climate change. One, we do not have the data that we can actually be able to use to analyze to see how each of the sectors is affected by climate change. The second thing is actually the capacity to model and simulate what are these impacts before they happen so that you can be able to advise the government. And one of the things that the KIPRA is doing is to ensure that they have what we are calling policy analysis and modeling unit. We are working towards institutionalizing that unit at KIPRA, and that is actually where now we need support. We have been working with the Joint Research Center for European Commission, supporting a team of KIPRA to do computable general equilibrium modeling. And that team has been able now to be trained to a point where they can actually be able to use the model. We have also been able to develop that model that can be able to simulate. But we noted that now climate change being very important, that model was not able to capture that. So we are customizing that model to be able to take on board elements, variables, and indicators on climate change. Perhaps that we will be able to, when we finalize, we can be able now to be able to analyze issues to do with the climate change. The team is actually going to Spain in March to be able to be trained more on modeling. And therefore, from our point of view, those are the areas that we are covering in relation to climate change. But also, finally, what this program can do, because it is a capacity building program, we would really want to have that element, various elements of climate change being taught to various policymakers and the technical people and other practitioners in climate change space. But also, we would want, when this program is running, the WRI can actually be able to come in to support in terms of having what I would call data repository in relation to climate change and other product. That way we can actually be able to work together and be able to be proud of this program. Thank you very much.
Mr. Laichena, thank you very much for those remarks. And in fact, you remind me that one of the most crucial elements of the resilience and adaptation agenda in climate is the data gap. At the moment, there's so many gaps in data that are actually affecting the predictions that are being made about our climate, the predictions that are being made about the damage that could come in the future. And so this element of RAMP is really crucial, and building the capacity at the University of Nairobi then makes this ever more sustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, the partnership between government and universities and organizations like ours is really groundbreaking. It's groundbreaking because we bring the best of all of those elements to address the issues like climate that are existential, that are the most important of our time. And I know that now we are going to move into signing that MOU, but it means a lot to us, Professor Kiama, that we can now really formalize a piece of work that will be groundbreaking, not only for our continent, I know it will inspire others further beyond. So I'll pass it on to the team that is going to set up the signing of the MOU, and we'll move on to that segment of our program. Thank you. I was so excited, I sat and I never got up again. I think we're going to move now, I'm looking at my team, to the Stories to Watch segment. Where is Nisha? Yes, yes, I see yes. So it is really a privilege to call back my president and CEO, Annie Dasgupta, because this program, or this element of WRI's programming, Stories to Watch, is one that actually is anticipated globally. People tune in when Annie releases the first showing of this, because it really does set the agenda for what we think when we look at the trends, and we are a research organization and we consider what we are seeing. These are the stories we think will be to be watched in 2023. So without further ado, Annie.
Can you see?
Yes, we have our screen.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. Thank you. As I said, we are a research organization, about 2,000 people. And it's a privilege for me to present this here with you. And every year, by end of the year, we gather all our experts and ask the question, what are the stories that will define next year, meaning the year we are in today? Like, what will happen? What can we do to focus our attention to? We started doing this, what I'm presenting to you, about 20 years back. Our first Stories to Watch was 20 years back. And at that time when we started, we did this actually for journalists. So 20 years back, we were hoping journalists would write more about climate. So that's why we did this work. But now, we don't need to do this for journalists. Climate stories are everywhere. Climate disasters everywhere. So the question for us now is what kind of things you should be watching for you will see in the news, but when you see it in the news, we hope you will know what's behind the news, what's under the news, ask good questions to it. Am I using this clicker, Lauren? No? Okay. So before I jump into the stories, I don't know, what you were saying something else here? Okay. I just want to revisit the last year very quickly. Otherwise, it's just easy to forget what happened last year. Last year, meaning year 2022, was actually a really difficult year. It started with a year which is the third year of pandemic, which continues. You heard news from China as it opened, 650 million cases there. So we feel this, not only the human cost of it, but the economic cost of it. And also the year started with the fear of inflation across the world, across all of the world, including continent of Africa. And we ended the year, which created pressure for all economies, at 9% globally. This was much worse in many other countries. And then in February, we are about to actually hit the one-year mark of it. Russia invaded Ukraine. That caused immense civilian and other costs of the people in Ukraine, which all of you know because it's in the newspaper for a year. But what also happened because of Ukraine is actually what the impact it had on the rest of Europe, on energy, on prices, but it also had impact all over the world. The impact was felt, and what it really taught us, this particular crisis, and also teaching us today, how interconnected global crises are, how interconnected our economies are, and how when something like this happens in one place, we all feel. We felt it very much by the energy crisis that triggered in the world. This is moving, right? I can't see the slide. Okay. I can see that slide. All right. And the energy crisis that started in Ukraine, then to Europe, actually impacted people all over the world. 70 million people globally risk actually losing energy, electricity access, a lot of them in the continent of Africa. A food crisis, because both Russia and Ukraine are major grain producers, impacted the whole world. The global food prices surged 14.3%. 22 million people at our risk in starvation of Horn of Africa. This was not happened just in 1 year. It's a continuing crisis that became worse. And then as this was happening, climate crisis continued. That last year was the worst year of climate-related weather disaster. The story you see on the screen is the worst of them, not the only one, in Pakistan, where floods actually decreased Pakistan GDP from 5% to 2%. So it wasn't just a weather disaster, which is not just a humanitarian disaster, but an incredible economic disaster where 30 million people were relocated. So this is the year that we had, and because of all these things, and because of the pandemic, after almost 30 years of continuous reduction of poverty across the world, I think more than 30 years, last few years, we have seen the poverty in the world increasing. Last year, because of the Ukraine crisis, actually 95 million more people will be pushed in poverty. This is a seminal change on what has happened in the poverty reduction across the world. So this is the year that we saw last year. So it was a difficult year. I just want to contextualize the stories I'm going to tell you. But it wasn't all bad. There were a few very important breakthroughs that took place last year that we think will not only define the year we are in, will define the years to come, and I'm going to quickly mention them to you. One was, think about the year I just mentioned to you. Economic turmoil, inflation, war. In spite of all these global turmoils that was going on, one thing actually kept working on, actually renewable energy. Renewable energy saw the best year last year. 8% increase across in the capacity. Why is this important? Because this actually signifies a transition of global economy towards a green energy that is hard to see beyond these crises that I just mentioned, that actually keep going, moving forward. The transition that we all are in to a new economy actually happening, not fast enough, not quick enough or at scale, but it's happening. Similarly, there was a very important conference in Montreal, which was the Global Biodiversity Conference. I was there. One very significant goal that was achieved of 30% protecting land and water and reversing biodiversity loss by 2030. I mean, I just want to underline, given the war, given all the things that could happen, people thought multilateralism or countries' ability to come together to solve problems will actually diminish. But actually, what we saw in Montreal was actually better than expected outcome of countries coming together for a more ambitious goal on nature. This has been growing. Actually, the COP last year on climate had a lot about nature. And this COP, something else happened. A major breakthrough on setting up something called Loss and Damage Fund. This is the fund which is the poorer or actually vulnerable countries have been asking for 30 years, saying that we, the poorer or vulnerable countries, we didn't cause the climate crisis. We didn't cause the emission. Naturally, the emission that we have in the atmosphere, most of it has come from industrial countries that have grown and become rich. So they have said, there are climate-related disasters taking place. We need funds, that things that we can't adopt to, that we need to actually recover from, that loss and damage needs to be compensated by richer countries, and actually rich countries agreed to set up such a fund. The fund is not yet funded, so it's just a beginning, but it's a very symbolic victory of solidarity in the world of richer countries coming together with vulnerable countries to set and collectively solve problems. The other thing that happened that is to note is across the world, this move towards just transition is actually moving forward. One of the very significant things that happened in Indonesia, something called JETP, which is Just Energy Transition Program. That set of countries, including the United States, the European Union, came together to support the energy transition of Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the countries that is very dependent on coal in their, which is one of the worst of the fuels that pollutes the atmosphere, to come together to transition. $20 billion of funds were promised for just unprecedented number. On the other end of the world, the United States passed 3 very significant climate-related laws that will transform their economy, the largest economy in the world. So these things also happened in a very difficult year from 2 ends of the. So the question that we asked ourselves very simply is that, will these breakthroughs that we see that happen in the world, will they remain just breakthroughs in corners of the world, or they will push actually a systemic shift that the world needs to move towards a new economy that is good for nature, good for people, and obviously good for decarbonize the world. So those are the questions we asked. I'm going to shift to 3 quick stories that we think will define the year coming. One is the energy crisis. How will the crisis that Europe faces today, how will that impact global transition of clean energy? So that's the question that we asked ourselves. Europe is the Russian invasion of Ukraine really weaponized energy in Europe. And Europe before the war was dependent, 40% of Europe natural gas supply was from Russia, and that got cut off in overnight, literally, which caused immense pain, as you can imagine, to families in Europe. The energy prices in Europe spiked by 41.5% in October. Energy prices raised standard cost of living. Families across are worried whether they will have energy to heat their homes this winter, which actually European leaders have done an amazing job for that not to happen. So the question is, what did Europe did short term? They did things that you would absolutely expect them to do. They agreed to actually first, I must think very, very, very commending, they actually tried to reduce demand use of natural gas by various different methods, which they were very successful in. They secured LNG gas from other places in the world as soon as they could do, which they were also successful. In some countries, they had to extend the use of coal power plants or extend nuclear power plants. But these set of actions that they took is to make sure that the energy supply for communities and families remain and they don't fall into crisis. And this winter, we have been lucky, actually has not been as harsh as people expected. So the crisis people thought was didn't come. So if you see this, the energy security, the yellow line in that shows the Russian energy supply, and the blue line shows that the alternative energy supply that Europe has been able to secure, mostly from US, Qatar, Nigeria. And you can see that they've been very successful in finding alternate energy sources or natural gas sources very quickly, and they should be commended for it. And they've actually replaced almost all of this year's supply of Russia. This increase has really made people worry, and that is really the question. That all this natural gas that is being, that ship out there is actually a temporary natural gas terminal that can be moved around. It's in a ship. It's the idea of future overcapacity. Are they investing too much? Will there be stranded asset? Would they get locked into a fossil-dependent energy source, in this case natural gas from other countries? Would that create dependency, and would that stop Europe from getting to the goal of their decarbonization goal? This risk that people worry is real. If you just look at this chart, for us to get to 1.5 degree, the world analysis of data by ours and everyone else, IEA, this is actually a chart from IEA, that shows for us to get to 1.5 degree, we have to reduce emission from natural gas. The green line, I hope you can see it, is actually what it needs to happen. But what all the lines above that shows all the kind of investment people have made, plan to make, or proposing to make. If all those investments were made, it would be very difficult, or actually nearly impossible, to reach 1.5 degree or get to Europe's goal of 2030. So naturally, people are concerned that what is it that will happen. Actually, everyone in the world doesn't think so. This picture is of Fatih Birol, who heads IEA, the International Energy Agency. And Fatih and people like Fatih think, no, actually what Europe, the crisis in Europe is going to turn a corner and actually accelerate the adoption of greener, more sustainable energy. Which is the question then that we all faced ourselves, is that, what is it that needs to happen? What would we watch for the crisis in Europe to spur the global shift to low-carbon energy future that people like Fatih think? We think there's few things to watch for. The first thing to watch for is actually what's going to happen in Europe. The interesting thing that what had happened in Europe, that the European Union hasn't been actually better, more organized, more coordinated energy policy than ever after the crisis. Actually, European leaders have not only been able to stick together, they actually have a much more coordinated energy policy than ever they've had. And if that sticks, that solidarity in Europe would be a critical thing to watch together for them to go forward. What has that resulted in? That has resulted in this. Europe actually has been reducing or increasing the renewable energy constantly. Over all the green lines there are different programs they put in. But this year, in the middle of the crisis, middle of the time when they were actually did not have resources, natural gas resources, they actually launched a new program called RE-Power, in RE-Power-U actually, that raised the 2030 target. I hope you can see the orange line there, from 40% renewable to 45% renewable. So that is what the solidarity resulted in. They plan to invest $224 billion in new investments, double their solar capacity, and target energy efficiency, which is a critical piece of the puzzle. But you can't really actually have an energy plan without families and citizens not being completely part of it. Because it requires you, one of the bigger things the European leaders are hoping for is actually efficiency gain, reduction of use of energy. It's a critical piece of the puzzle. That's a picture of a heat pump. So heat pump is how you heat your home with electricity very efficiently. So heat pumps are having a day actually in Europe. Their sales in Europe have skyrocketed. This is also part of the United States plan of climate. If heat pumps are used across the world, they will reduce emission by 500 million tons. 500 million tons is exactly the same number of all the cars there are in Europe today and its emissions. It's a very significant, but what the point is simply citizens have to be part of the solutions, and how they behave, how they actually use the incentive the European leaders have created will be very much to work through. And finally, the politics itself. This is a very peculiar, very positive thing that's happening in Europe, that 83% of people in EU, when they were surveyed, actually thought after Russia's invasion it is more urgent to invest in renewable energy. It's a very, very important that citizens in every country in Europe, this is the European Union survey, in Germany actually these numbers are higher, that they think in the middle of crisis they should invest more in renewable energy, gives political leaders the space to innovate and actually push for more ambition. Other countries in the world look at that number and they all hope that they can actually have people's support across political spectrum on energy policy. But what is happening across the world? This is what's happening in Europe. What to watch for across the world? The picture across the world is actually quite mixed. Because as Europe started buying natural gas, every country in the world who is dependent on natural gas started worrying about it, and China, India, Africa all tried to secure natural gas. That's one thing that has happened. But other things also happened. China is already a leader of renewable energy and it continues to invest in it. India has pledged 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030, for which they need to produce 25 gigawatts of renewable energy every year, which is actually going forward. So right now, we actually do not know how this policy in Europe will impact, but what we do see that this crisis in Europe has made energy independence and towards renewable energy a very important part of policy, and there is a very likelihood people like Fatih are actually right about how the crisis in Europe will impact global transition. This is a story that you'll hear. This impacts Kenya. It impacts every country in the world because energy is very much a commodity traded across the world, and we will see a lot of changes. That's my first story. My second story is about tropical forest. The tropical forest is a very important part of the climate story, and we have new leadership in places like Brazil, places like Colombia, that is critically creating hope. This is a picture of President Lula in the COP. He was by far the biggest attraction and quite a commotion when he arrived. I mean, there were other world leaders there, including President of the United States. But President Lula, when he spoke, it was the most difficult actually ticket to get into the auditorium to see. I couldn't manage a ticket. Some of these people sitting here did. But why was it? Because President Lula, 40% of tropical primary forest is in the Amazon, and President Lula has promised to reverse deforestation of the Amazon. So it caused a lot of hope. I'm sorry, my computer is not working now. Because this is why people were excited. The green part of the chart shows when President Lula was president last time, reduced deforestation to a dramatic lowest point in 2 decades. And as soon as he left office, the blue line shows that how deforestation increased. And under the last administration, it actually dramatically increased, the orange part. So President Lula's presence, and he promised actually to take action. And he has taken action from day one. He has appointed a very well-known environmentalist, the Minister of Environment. He appointed a indigenous leader, Sonia Guajara, as the Minister of Indigenous Communities. He's reinstated an array of deforestation policies, reopened the Amazon Fund, revitalized civil society. So all the things that you think he promised, he actually did in the first day. This is the reason for hope. But it's not just Amazon in Brazil, because the Amazon basin is 6.8 million kilometers. It's the size of the United States. It includes 9 countries, and a lot of these countries have leadership, like President Petro from Colombia is also a new leader who's also promised major shifts in nature-positive deforestation. But if you think about the tropical forest systems in the world, there are only 3 tropical forest systems that are left in the world. And which is, as you well know, is the Amazon Basin, the Great Congo Basin, and the Indonesia and the Southeast Asia forest systems. These are the 3 tropical forests. One thing I want to outline, that these forests provide 23% of the world's possibility of mitigation of the world's emissions across the world. So this is the most preserving them is the most cost-effective way to protect our climate. But, and I hope the next thing works, this is the data, and I hope you can see the magenta dots in the data. This is the data of one of our tools called Global Forest Watch. And this is the destruction of this very, very precious tropical forest in the last 20 years. And if you just take Brazil in that picture for 1 minute, Brazil has lost 18% of its original forest cover, 18%. And scientists feel that if Brazil loses 20 or 25% of forest cover, the whole ecosystem will slowly start collapsing and become savanna. This is irreversible. Losing this forest system is not something we can get back. The biodiversity that exists in it and the immense ecosystem services it provides. And we haven't done a very good job so far about protecting it. But this forest system, I just pointed out, is not just about trees. 47 million people live in the Amazon forest system. 47 million people. 10% of the biodiversity, up to 140 billion metric tons of carbon is stored in the system. This is only the Amazon, not all the 3. So you can imagine the importance of the system and why people are interested in President Lula's election, Petro's election. And it is not just that it is people live the biodiversity. The major economies, can you go to the next slide? The major economy of Brazil is dependent on the Amazon forest. This is true for Congo Basin, true for Indonesia, is that the economy of Brazil, which is a lot agricultural based, just like in Kenya, is dependent on the rainfall system that originates from the Amazon system. So destroying the forest actually is not just about the trees, it's about people who live there, it's about the economy that we are all dependent on from the forest system. So it's not that we need to just preserve the forest, we need to figure out what economy, we need a different model for economy so it's good for not only nature but for people. So the question that we faced in this particular topic is, will President Lula's return lead to a transformation in how we manage forests and protect tropical forests? Because it's critical, because it needs change, and people are really looking forward to across the world for President Lula's leadership on this. So, what need to we watch for? First, of course, we need to watch for will President Lula succeed in things he's promised in Brazil. And I think there are 3 things to watch for there. One is President Lula got elected as president, but he didn't really win the legislature or all the governors. So will he be able to push forward his policies with the opposition in place in governance? And some of the early indication are true that he's been able to build together a coalition to pass some of the laws to move forward. The second is most of the deforestation in Amazon, which is true in other parts of the world too, is actually illegal. So it's not about new laws. It's about would you be able to implement existing law, enforce existing law, and finally, would you be able to get international capital flowing to the Amazon, which is literally a stop during the last administration. So that's what to watch for. But it's not just what happens in countries in Brazil, but what happens in global market outside the country does matter a lot to the forest. For example, regulation. EU has a regulation now that they would only allow deforestation-free commodities going. That has a huge impact to what happens in Amazon. Private sector, all the commodity trading, the reason deforestation happens is not because people want products out of it, it's actually they want the land under the forest for pasture land, for leather, for meat, for soybean. These are all commodities that are globally traded. So how private sector behaves is a critical, and how carbon markets work. how markets that actually companies buy carbon that is stored in the trees and the forest, and there's a global market for it. How will it go? Last year wasn't a very good year for a carbon market. And finally, how global finance from international capital, both public and private, will it start flowing to the Amazon? People believe it needs to flow at a triple the rate than it has happening right now. The second part to watch is would the global action on tropical forests take hold? There is a new global pact that was just announced between DRC, Brazil, and Indonesia to come together, where the three big tropical forests are. These are the three important countries, not the only countries, three important, coming together to create a global pact. That's been making for a while, but whether that will take hold, and what will happen to other parts of the tropical forest system. For example, in Indonesia, there's an election coming up. So is an election coming up in Democratic Republic of Congo. Would these forest protection be part of the election mandate? And finally, there is a summit planned by the President of Gabon and President Macron for France, actually next month, to figure out a different, innovative way to finance protection of forests. Would that take hold as we go forward? So what happens to forests? And whether the new leadership that we see across the world, will it change? It is a very important question, simply because we actually have known deforestation as a problem for a long time. It's not a new problem or new recognition. But collectively, we haven't been able to reverse it at any great scale, except Indonesia has actually had only country that last 5 years have been able to successfully reduce deforestation. Would we see we need a really systemic shift here that is good for people and good for a new approach, which is what actually Marina de Silva, the minister in Brazil, actually focusing on. It's called they are calling it called the bioeconomy. Will that take hold and rebound forests and the people who live there? So this was the second story. There's only one more, and you're okay. The last story is actually about financing the transition. And the reason is, I just want to make sure we are all on the same page on transition. When the word transition here simply means the economic transition that needs to happen in the world, which is almost every sector: transportation, buildings, energy, how our buildings are efficient, agriculture, water. All these are part of the climate stories. And most science, or most projection, including our own, actually shows that if the transition takes place, there are huge amount of wealth gain for countries, prosperity gain for countries. We actually estimate by 2030, if all these investments are made in transition that is required, $26 trillion more will be in the economy, creating millions of more jobs. So transition as a whole seems like a good thing. However, it requires initial investment. That blue dot you see in the top, most people estimate by 2030 we need about $5 trillion of investment in the system, in these things. Just to contextualize $5 trillion, last year our global GDP was $80 trillion. So $5 trillion in 2030 will be about 2 or 3% of GDP, because the GDP will increase by then. But right now, the money that we're spending on climate across the world is less than $1 trillion, about $0.6 trillion. So this transition that all the countries have promised, they have committed to, will not happen if that money is not there to do it. So the question is, how do we actually get to that $5 trillion number? This problem of lack of funds to implement policies is true everywhere in the world. If you can read the chart, it's true for rich countries, it's true for poorer countries, it's true for every region in the world. But some places, it's more acute. And if you look at this chart, which is just a subset of the chart you just saw, Southeast Asia needs 9 times more than the investment. Africa as a continent needs about 8.5, 9 times more investment. Southern Asia needs more than 10 times more than what the investment is happening right now for them to meet the goals they have to meet the climate challenge in front of them. So amount of financing gap is a serious issue, so none of this transition will happen if it doesn't. So you will say, oh, this is a lot of money is needed. There's not enough money in the world. But that is absolutely not true. The global private capital market is more than $100 trillion. We're only talking about $5 trillion. So it's not that the money is not there, the money is not there the right places. And if you just look at how does climate investments in any country, say Kenya for example, how does it get financed? It basically gets financed from 4 places, right? Domestic public funds, which is right now is most important in most countries in the world. Domestic private capital, which is somewhat there in the countries in Global South, not as much, it's actually much more than Global North. International public funds, like from the World Banks of the world or ADBs of the world, or bilateral funds, and international private capital, which is actually flowing quite healthily in regional country and not flowing at all in the Global South. So this is what most of the finance comes from. It's the domestic public finance in Global South, countries like Kenya, countries like India, Indonesia, but it plays a very important role. And it's actually under immense pressure right now because of this. Because the debt burden of most countries, of most vulnerable countries, has exponentially gone up over the last years. It's from 27%, which is the high and in high or medium distress, has gone from 27 to 56%. What does it mean? It means countries actually have to put more of their resources to service debt than they can use that for climate-related solutions. And that means it is less money to do more things like that. Similarly, if you look at the second, why is the debt distress going on? Can you go to the next slide? Is that though the world is actually putting together more money, this is a loan disbursement by multilateral development banks. The yellow part is concessional financing. The blue part is loans. So the loan part is actually going up, but concessional financing in the world is not going up, which means the debt is not getting lower in these countries. So when Pakistan has a disaster, or countries in Africa have a disaster, they are borrowing money, but not getting the debt relief that they actually need, which is a big topic that is going on. What about private capital, the other solution? The private capital is actually flowing pretty healthily in 3 places: Europe, United States, and in China, which is a domestic private capital at a very... All the other places, private capital is not flowing. If you look at the Africa number, it's literally $2 billion. Africa has the most solar potential in the world. So why is it money is not flowing where it is the most potential? The most of the reason is most private capital, people who run private capital, think it's risky, that these investments are risky. So the same project, these numbers are before the current inflation. Right now, these are more expensive everywhere in the world. Same project that will get a 2% capital to invest in would require 14% or 15% in Nigeria and Pakistan. Naturally, those projects are not viable on those places when the capital costs go up like that. These numbers are much higher today in 2023 than these are 2020 numbers when inflation rates were much lower. And so these discussion of there's not enough financing going, what has been going on. That yes, we are doing climate commitments, but we will not be able to reach because, so last year, it came to a real halt. This is Mia Mottley, the picture that you see on top of Times 100. Mia Mottley is the Prime Minister of Barbados, and she actually put together a proposition to everyone, which got a lot of momentum, I think, which is a comprehensive proposition to fix the finance sector, not just climate finance. That includes debt relief, that includes private capital flows, that includes money for adaptation and loss and damage, and things like that. That actually provided a kind of a blueprint to what to do, and many world leaders attached themselves. The questions we have on this is, will the financial reform that is required for the world to support the transition, to spur investment, would it take place? So that is the big question. So what do we have to watch for this year? This is going to be a pivotal year for finance reform because it's been discussed and because people are... First thing to watch, actually in a few months, IMF and World Bank was going to have their annual meeting. These are the two heads of IMF and World Bank. And the question there will be, this will be in Washington, D.C., where I live, is that would they actually embrace a like evolutionary reform or actually transformational reform? Which means evolutionary reform would they figure out how to lend more money? Or transformational reform, that would mean they actually figure out how to become a bank and IMF that actually recognizes today's reality of climate and climate-related risks, actually figure out a support that attacks that problem directly, and figures out how to get the $5 trillion, which is mostly private capital, flowing. How do they leverage private capital in this? So this would be something to watch for in a couple of months, and we will see how ambitious these organizations are in a few months. The other thing to watch for would be in this summer, this is Mia Mottley and President Macron going to hold a summit in Paris on this topic. And because one of the proposals Prime Minister Mottley has made is to create a climate trust, climate mitigation trust, using about $500 billion of IMF capital in a particular financial visitory way, in which her advisors claim that $500 million can produce $5 trillion of private capital. This is a very ambitious proposal. There is parties who think this is a great idea, some parties think it's not, but there is a proposal to use money differently that IMF and World Bank holds. The question is, will it get momentum? Most importantly, would countries in G7 and G20 support it? Without their support, it's impossible to actually go forward. India, this is Prime Minister Modi of India, actually hosts G20 this year. And there's a lot of proposals in this. And the two things I want to point out, there's a common framework of debt treatment. That's very much on the agenda. Prime Minister Modi also has put together a new disaster risk resilience working group, which we think can really help the adaptation mitigation agenda and the loss and damage agenda. We will see if rich countries, these are the 20 richest countries in the world, they are, just to be clear, these 20 countries together have the lion's share of emissions in the world. About 75% of emission comes from these 20 countries. So what these 20 countries do and their leadership is critical to see if we're going to make progress as a globe, as a planet. So we look forward to what happens in India. And the question is, the private sector will play a part. There's a real opportunity this year. I mentioned $20 billion in Indonesia in the JETP project. 10 billion of the 20 billion is supposed to be private sector. And if we will see this year, if private sector is able to muster their muscles and actually be a partner, this is the best, most protected place they could invest because there's $10 billion private public capital is there. Would we see that happen as something similar? Indonesia's plan later, which is about $17 billion. So there's a chance to see if private sector capital will flow at scale in these areas. And finally, when we get to the COP in Dubai, this is the next climate COP in Dubai in November, there is a real expectation that whether we will get a comprehensive finance issue dealt with in the COP. Historically in COP, we have dealt with mostly justice-related finance issues. So the $100 billion that has been promised, will we get their loss and damage, etc. But the last two bullets you see are new to the COP agenda. Reforming the World Bank has never been discussed except in the Egypt COP. Getting private sector de-risked. This kind of comprehensive finance sector reform is new to the COP discussion and very welcome. Would we see a dramatic shift and a much more comprehensive thinking of how to get to the $5 trillion so would we see this year a real reform of unlocking funding for developing countries for the climate transition? And would we see a shift, a systemic shift that needs to take place in this? So with that, I want to end these three stories. If you have questions, I look forward to it. Only thing I want to mention is from WRI's point of view, we believe in system change. We believe in not this simple initiative, would they lead to a systemic transformation that's needed. We actually try to monitor system change through a system change lab in WRI. I welcome you to actually look that up and how we are actually using data to understand if the world is systematically shifting to a better world or just episodically, as you've seen. So thank you very much for your patience and listening.
Annie, thank you very much. It's always engaging, even hearing it the second and the third time. I hope you'll keep up with the World Resources Institute's website, because every year there's a big announcement of Stories to Watch. So Stories to Watch will keep going. But as the year unfolds, we all give this talk for the rest of the year, so you'll continue hearing it. What's exciting, actually, Annie, about this is that Stories to Watch, in many ways, this year makes a very strong bet on the urgency for adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation and resilience building. The fact that all three stories, forest, energy, and finance, really speak to the vulnerability, especially in the global south. It makes us here in this partnership that we just launched, RAMP, a significant statement for how we must go forward this year. So we are timely, we are responsive to exactly what we think is going to happen in the course of the year. I love Mia Motley, and I love the statement. We cannot be good and excellent at saving banks, but poor at saving people. This is really at the heart of climate justice. I see I think there are some roving mics. If anybody has a question they would like to ask of the president, please, the microphone is here. I see one hand there. I see another hand here. We'll take that one, and I'll take one more. I see one hand in the middle. Let's take all three, and then Annie, you can come and respond.
Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation.
Just bring it closer.
Right, yes. So my question is, isn't there maybe one other thing to watch? And that thing to watch is the groundswell of climate action, particularly driven by the youth. Because the impacts of climate change on the youth is really resulting in fewer job opportunities, loss of jobs, and there's a gap there. And I'm just wondering, because there was a bit of active work that was being done by them, but it's kind of quiet. But I believe it's likely to be spurred in the coming months. Thank you.
Why don't we take all the questions, and then fantastic question. There's behind you, I think.
Good morning.
Oh, there you are.
My name is Parita Shah. And just out of curiosity from what Prime Minister Motley had actually said, and looking at the creation of the funds, especially for regions like Amazon and the other tropical rainforests. But in reality, if we look at multilateral or multinational companies and even countries like America, which are actually responsible, like for example, ranching, where the corned beef is actually exported. So when this fund is created, will these countries and the users or the consumers of these products from the forest, will they be responsible for contributing to the funds? Because I think that is the first step where every user should be responsible to contribute towards that fund. Thank you.
There was a...
Good morning.
Oh, there you are.
My name is Jude Kwach, a student from the Environmental Club. We are glad to have you. And my question goes, our club vision is anchored on sustainability, which is also part of our VC's 5-point reform agenda. We have a club project on solid waste, where we're trying to show that waste can be used as a resource, which we want to use to drive sustainability in the university. How does students come on board to further WRI agenda on climate change? Thank you.
There was one question there. Yeah, please.
Oh, thank you so much. Mwalo.
Can you bring that closer to you? Why don't they will figure this out. Let me answer these three. Don't go away. And we'll come to you just after. I hope they can get a different microphone for you. Let me just try to answer that. Thank you for your question on groundswell. We absolutely think that, that the mass movements that are taking place by students, by communities, actually, reason we don't have a story this year because we had a story exactly on that last year and we want to repeat, and I would love to send that to you and to see what you think. But I want to find out, this has become a very important part of the climate story. I was in the room when in Copenhagen, not Copenhagen, in Glasgow, when they announced, the private sector announced $100 trillion of capital that will be net zero. And Greta Thunberg was there, the fact, and got up and said blah, 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 and walked out. But these things are happening. One of the biggest points I want to make is most of this climate policy we see now are not just about climate. They're about justice and jobs. So one of the best example of that, and I didn't actually talk about that story here, is the 3 laws that got passed in the United States this year. They are the most ambitious climate laws ever passed in the United States. Actually, most ambitious except when we apparel to you. The word climate was not in any of the laws. When the first time the law was put in that did not pass, which was much more ambitious, was $3 trillion, it was called America's Jobs Act. And the 3 laws that are passed today, that are there, each one of them aligns with something called Justice 40, which is 40% of investment of every dollar will be spent in communities of need of the frontline community. So I think this, not only the movement is there, we see policy changes taking place in that. And I'm sorry that you were not there last year. We did a story about that, and I completely agree with you that it is a very important factor on what's happening in the world. On your question of consumers, you're absolutely right. Consumption, how we consume, is a very much part of it. Whether consumers should play on it or their government should, tax dollars should pay on it, it's a question of mechanics. But this is why, what I just pointed out to you, Loss and Damage Fund, why that is so symbolic. It's an agreement of solidarity between richer countries that consume more today and produce more emissions, is actually acknowledging that and saying we will put in money from tax dollars, which is from the consumers, to actually put a fund to that. So that is one thing that is going on. The other things that are going on, there are laws that are coming up. The one I mentioned is the EU law on deforestation. That is actually regulatory mechanism, so the consumption of goods are protected. So that one is the deforestation law. The new law called CBAM is actually protect goods that are coming into Europe, for example, that are decarbonized and low carbon, so that to figure out an economic solution to that. So we see that. I wish other countries would have similar laws that protects and changes consumer behavior, right? So if you can't buy any more soybean for animal feed that is not deforestation free, then you don't have a choice. But soybean, or meat consumption, is a very critical part of what is going on. And we believe the global north, which consumes much more, much more than global south, actually the consumption revolution that needs to happen, and recycling or circular economy. My colleague right here, who's smiling, her second sentence is about circular economy, because this is such an important part of the solution. And we actually, just last thing I want to say, we believe human behavior or change in human behavior. So the IPCC report recently pointed out, I think 46 or 56, I forget the actual number, of change will come from human behavior shifts. We actually set up a behavior lab in WRI to understand human behavior and how can that impact policy. So thank you very much for your question. Solid waste, first of all, I hope we have a large team in Nairobi, I'm looking at Wanjira, can directly support and work with you, and I hope you can use the resources WRI has for your environment club. So we would love to chat with you about that. But what you're doing on solid waste is a critical point. Solid waste is not only bad for the for waste, but it also clogs up all our waterways when it's not managed properly. So it's a very important thing that you're working on, and I hope we can find ways to bring you resources that we have collected from other places in the world of how we can support you, not only in solid waste, other things you can do. We have all our resources, everything we do, every piece of research data we produce is public. So it's very much available, and after this meeting, I'm going to give you what our website is so that you can reach out to it. Thank you. I absolutely want to hear your question.
Thank you so much. I'm Mwalo Maxwell, and the data you've shared is quite insightful, and again, it is quite alarming. I have 2 questions. In COP27, loss and damage fund was set aside. But in African countries, we are very poor in managing funds, more so when it comes free from, agencies. What policies you guys, rather from, from a leader perspective, are you putting in place to make sure that the funds that are given to Kenya or the University of Nairobi is really utilized on what is supposed to be utilized for? Number 2, President Lula, you talked about President Lula taking actions. What are you guys, putting in place to make sure that really what he's talking about, the book cover, you can read a book cover, be so nice, but again, when you read the chapters inside, be so dirty. So what are you guys putting in place to make sure that what he has started, he makes sure that he complete it with the zeal that he has started with? The third question, in Kenya specifically, Kenya Power, company is a public company, and the government has made it so tough for private, companies to.
Wow, those are really good questions. Let me start with your last question. We are a global organization. You're absolutely right, but we absolutely believe in country-level transition. This is why we have large teams in every country we work in. We don't work in every country. In Africa, we work in few. Kenya is one of them, so we have a team. So though we are a global organization, we believe change happens in a country, and we want to make sure the country's change is not only powered by best of science in the country, but best of science that's available in the world. So that is our primary mission, is to we learn faster, bring the best of knowledge available on the ground. So your question about Kenya Power, we actually have our leader of our energy program is absolutely fabulous, and she's actually developing energy transition plan. Maybe Wanjira can talk about it. And everything we do, we try to do through consultation to bring in what's best available in the country and globally. So if you have an idea, please get in touch with us, because this is a live question of energy transition in these countries. It's a live question for the world right now, Africa's energy transition, not only because of the transition of renewable energy, because also Africa has, just like a lot of other global south, a large proportion of population that doesn't have access to dependable energy. So how does these both things happen? It's a very live topic. We would love to hear, but everything we do is through collaboration with partners. Actually, Wanjira leads globally our partnership strategy. Your question about funds and funds management is a very good one. So what is our role? And I will use the word nonprofit in general rather than just WRI. What is our role in this about funds? We don't have the funds, right? We make the case for funds that other people give, Kenya or Brazil. I think we play a role in 2 ways. And we very strongly believe in accountability, that what governments are promising, whether they're doing in that or not. So for example, every year before COP, we publish a report that says on NDC what climate goals they have promised and what they have done. That report is actually the standard everyone uses to see what countries are doing and not doing. We absolutely believe in transparency. So our data services, so for example, let's take Amazon or DRC forest, for example. We have data sets that's available to everyone, to you and everyone, to see what is happening to the forest. What forests are getting, is there forest fire, is it getting deforested or not? And we are working on developing tools that will get much more sophisticated going forward. Not only we will know forest, we'll know how much embedded carbon there is. So I think our role, because we actually don't hold the money, so we can't hold is actually to bring transparency and accountability in the system. And we do that across almost everything we do. So, but thank you very much for your question. Thank you everyone for your question and being here.
Question.
And that sadly brings us to the end of this program, but thank you again, everybody, for that. I think the last question, in many ways, also triggers an important invitation, the invitation that all of us have to do our part in holding our leaders accountable, in holding systems accountable. And those, especially at universities, I always remember that we are the ones who end up in those offices, in their treasury, in planning, that we would be inspired to be the sort of leaders that we hold, that would be held accountable. So thank you for that question, and thank you all for an excellent morning. Have a lovely day.
This launch, we were launching the RAMP, which is the Resilience and Adaptation Mentorship Program here at the University of Nairobi. And one thing that stood out for all of us is the intentional involvement of universities as well as governments, because as one of our interviewees said earlier, it is very important to involve the youth in this agenda. And during the discussion, we've been told the importance of pushing for this agenda and also solving the climatic issues in relation to the economic stability of the country. Here with me, I have some students who will share with us their key takeaways from the event. Good morning. Tell us your name and, of course, some of the takeaways you have come out with from the event.
Yes, good morning to my name. I'm Newton Mutede Libere. Yeah, so for me, I would just like to I'm just saying that the speech has been effective to us. We have learned a lot about climate change and the implications that we need to implement as students or as stakeholders, since because it's our key roles for all of us to try to fight the disaster of climate change, whereby changes in climate are naturally affecting like every places in the world, whereby there has been a lot of issues, the drought, those in desert areas. So we have just learned a lot. We would just like to, whereby the government can have some implications, like we have sustainable development goals that we fund, and we try to at the end of the day, we all have that role to try to fight this disaster as all of us together. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You can tell us your name and maybe tell us how you are planning on taking away what we've been taught in the discussion and putting it to practice to push for that climate change agenda.
Okay, good morning. My name is Anthony from Taibet, student, University of Nairobi. I'm taking Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, Dryland Resource Management. Yeah, the conference has been good. We are really actually going to use the knowledge that we've got here and the links so that we may take action in climate change, keep some mitigation, build the capacity among the communities. For instance, we have a certain company that we work with that build capacity in ASAL communities in Kenya, building CBOs and making from common citizen know the impacts and how climate change can be mitigated. Yeah.
And how do you feel being part of this conversation? It must be quite the privilege.
Yeah, it's a privilege. I'm honored to be here. It's actually a conference that we've been looking for the links, how you can go about it, get some knowledge before going to disperse the knowledge to other people in the community. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Good morning. I would love to know your name, and you can tell us about what you've learned from this session and how you're planning on implementing it in your own attempts to pushing for the climate change agenda.
Okay, my name is Michael Obiero, a third-year student from the University of Nairobi Upper Kabete campus. I'm taking a course in crop science major. So from today's event, it's been quite an insightful event. We've learned about the ways we can help improve our climate. So as a crop science student, it's really important for us to push forward in the means on how we can work on climate smart agriculture, and other important steps towards improving our climate.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So that is what we have from some of our students. And now we have the CEO herself who will be speaking to us as well. Good morning. I'm fantastic. It's such an honor that you're closing this event, and we would love to know to hear your parting shot and maybe a call to action for all the students who attended here today.
Well, listen, first of all, I am so delighted that we're here at the University of Nairobi and that we had an opportunity to sign an MOU with the Vice Chancellor around building the capacity of our government institutions, planning ministries, treasury, around climate resilience and adaptation. That's the most important issue today. So we're looking forward to building a strong partnership with the university. And I would just say this university produces some of the best brains in our country. So I look forward to engaging with them. Many of them will be leading those institutions, and that there will be a wonderful bridge as they enter those institutions well prepared because of the program that we are calling the Resilience and Adaptation Mainstreaming Program, or RAMP.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And that brings us to the end of this launch. I would like to say thank you to everybody who attended, and of course the panelists who informed us more on the initiative. Let us take it upon ourselves to push for this agenda, because the future is ours, and as the youth, we have that responsibility. Thank you. Nani ameng'ara? Oh, nakaa mlevi.